I'm delighted to introduce our panelists who will explore their roles as business owners and innovators, how they can help address these urgent global environmental problems and at the same time create successful businesses. So let's introduce our panelists one by one. First off, co-founder and chief technology officer at Tasman, Shalini Divya. Shalini recently completed her PhD, which focused on cathode materials for high-performance rechargeable aluminium-ion batteries. And she is now working on commercializing the battery technology. And we're very pleased to have you here today, Shalini.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's great.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shalini. And next up is Ashton Partridge, Chief Science Officer at Manufacturing Systems Limited. MSL is a New Zealand business startup with a unique polymer production process. Ashton oversees the team of scientist engineers translating ideas from the laboratory into commercial products.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And Veronica Stevenson, she is founder and CEO of Humblebee. Humblebee is a New Zealand biomaterial startup that uses biomimicry to capture information encoded within a solitary bee's genome to create a new plastic that's safer for people and the planet.
Thanks, James. Good to be
Awesome.
here.
And last but not least, we have joining us live from the USA, somewhere near Chicago, is Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder of Lanzatec, Sean Simpson.
Hello, James.
Hi, Sean. Lanzatec is a clear example of an industrial waste-to-value success story. Its technology turns industrial gas into ethanol, which can be used as an energy source, such as jet fuel, reducing carbon dioxide emissions. Great. Well, thank you to all the panelists. Great to have you here today. Thank you. Okay, so before we kick off, a reminder again about our Q&A module. Pop your questions in there, and we're going to take a break about every 10 minutes to answer some of those questions. Also a reminder to use the hashtag CleanTech. Okay, so the first question. This is an interesting one because we believe at Callaghan Innovation that CleanTech is front and center. It allows us to solve environmental challenges, create successful businesses, and grow the New Zealand economy post-COVID. But there's always that question about what exactly does success look like for New Zealand CleanTech. And so what we're going to do here is just kind of examine that from some different perspectives. And Veronica, I'm going to pass that question to you to just begin the discussion.
Sure. I think that the clean green image that we have culturally, however tarnished it may be, sits very deeply within our nation's culture. And I think that we can not just wait for regulations internationally to trickle down and influence us, we can be world leaders. And I think that New Zealand underestimates its ability based on its population and size and geographical proximity, whereas I think our real power is in that culture and in how we want to do things better.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think owning that would be a real sign of success.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you just expand a bit more? What do you mean by owning it?
Instead of waiting for international regulations to come in and influence us, to go, this is who we are as a people, as a country, and then allow that culture to filter outwards and allow the solutions that come from living in a culture like that and having infrastructure and support from government and agencies like Callaghan Innovation to then be exported. I think that would have an influence on the global trend of clean tech. Yeah. Okay, that's great. So Shalini, can you sort of pick it up from there? Veronica's talked about kind of staying ahead of international regulations and kind of tying it perhaps to our national identity and who we are and what we're known for.
I think New Zealand has a lot of potential for becoming the innovation hub of the world. We have cutting-edge technology and innovations coming out of our universities, and maybe not focus so much on becoming the manufacturing hub, but if we try to become, if we have something like a battery research institute here in New Zealand, where people from all over the world can come and, look forward to solving, the science problems. That way, I think New Zealand can put itself out there in the world and become, the face of CleanTech as well.
Yeah, nice. So you're talking about perhaps developing some centres of excellence here as well?
Yeah.
And that
maybe we can focus on certain technologies, like if we just focus on some fields of science and not everything, because if we have that pointy end towards technologies, then I think we might do a little more, we can do better. So yeah, if we have those research institutes or, people usually look forward to going to Europe and Switzerland, to solve any of their, I'm going to speak for batteries, of course, when it comes to any battery problem. So why not think of creating some place like that here in New Zealand and then just, create that on the world map, that here in New Zealand we have the world's first, battery research institute or whatnot for New Zealand, and maybe go forward from there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Sean, I'm going to come to you about this question about success. What does success look like for New Zealand CleanTech?
I mean, from our perspective, it's really about impact. How do you take technologies, how do you take innovations locally and really ensure that they can have maximum impact on a global stage? For example, in the area of climate change, how do you ensure that those innovations don't just have a local significance, but have a global significance to dramatically reduce dependence on fossil fuels, dramatically reduce CO2 emissions? And I think New Zealand is a great incubator from which such innovations can spring, but a recognition that to have impact, those innovations must go offshore and become relevant in very large industrial regions of the world.
Yeah, nice one, Sean. Hey, just while you were talking there, Sean, another question came to mind for you. I mean, given that Lanzatec is now based in the USA, you started off in New Zealand, you're talking about the importance of, if you want to have impact, basically leaving New Zealand. We'll unpack that a bit later. But I just wondered if you could give us like a brief, perhaps slightly amusing kind of view on how Lanzatec actually started. Can you talk us through the kind of moments of creation?
Yeah, sure. So we started in 2005. Myself and Richard Forster founded the company, and since that time, just to put the story a little in perspective, since that time, we now have 200 employees. We have a commercial plant operating in China. We're constructing several commercial plants around the world. But we actually started in the basement of a DSIR building, the predecessor to the Callaghan Innovation, and our first incubators were bought from the local dairy. We repurposed the refrigerators that had broken down in dairies from around Auckland, and our first microbe shakers were actually bought from the barbecue warehouse. We started very, very modestly in that context, and as I say, today we've raised over $350 million based on the innovations that came from that time, actually. So I think in that context, we're kind of representative of a number 8 wire way of thinking, but taken to an industrial scale. That's
great, Sean. Ashton, can you pick up the thread on what does success look like for NZ CleanTech?
Yeah, I think success must include a whole of government approach, because we must get the kids being educated in clean tech, whatever type of technology it may be, and then be able to migrate them into industry. I would prefer to think we could have local industry. I mean, Sean's right, it makes complete sense for Lanzatec to be offshore. With us, we've got building integrated photovoltaics happening in Texas, yes. But I would like to think we could actually make some industry, grow industry here in New Zealand for our kids to come out of academia, out of the institutes, into businesses. And so we've got a couple of initiatives which can actually do that. So it depends what success means and who defines that in New Zealand.
Yep.
I would suggest we need to grow high-tech industry here
Yep.
to pay for what COVID has taken from us. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Yeah, and it seems like a central point is that, why are we doing this?
Yes.
We would love to have more clean tech jobs in New Zealand. We would love to be a stronger economy. We would love as a nation to improve New Zealand's environment and the global environment. But kind of how are we doing that, and why are we doing it as well? And one of the examples that we were kind of talking about earlier this week was really the example of Vestas. So, Vestas, and I'm not too sure on the origins of Vestas, but as many of you will know, it's a very, very large manufacturer of wind turbines. It started a number of decades ago and has grown to the point where they employ tens and tens of thousands of people. So at some point, the people behind Vestas, or perhaps the scientists behind the technology which created Vestas, thought, this is a great idea. This is the future. We can see a free, almost endless renewable source of fuel. Okay, how do we grab hold of that market? And they still dominate the market, even though there's been decades of people competing as well. So how do we create that sort of the New Zealand version of Vestas as well? And that would seem like a noble goal to have as well, because obviously it's just not one company. There'll be a whole bunch of different companies and research and development institutes around Vestas as well. So we've begun to unpack what success looks like. And I guess the next thing is, like, how big could New Zealand clean tech become? How important could it be? And I think one way of looking at it is to think about the actual size of the markets that each of your companies are looking at as well. There are some huge numbers out there. I was at a presentation recently where one person said it was 23 trillion a year until 2030, and the next person said 8 trillion a year till 2030. And it was like, well, okay, it gets more or less to the point of being semi-meaningless, apart from being very large. But I just wonder if we could just kind of go around each of the businesses and just sort of talk about the sort of size of market that each of you are in. And then if we scale that up and think about the other NZ CleanTech businesses, we'll get a sense of the kind of market size. Shalini?
Yep. So I make batteries, right? And any application that you might think of, cars, drones, cell phones, laptops, they all have batteries. And right now we're all progressing towards a cleaner and a greener technology. We are electrifying everything right now. And that is why I think the pressure on lithium-ion batteries is increasing tremendously, right? Aluminium-ion batteries, Tasman-ion batteries right now, they will be focusing on this one particular niche, maybe commercial drones and e-bikes. And the reason for that is that because the technology of aluminium-ion is not, right now it cannot compete with lithium-ion. And that is why we want to design batteries that can be used for commercial drones. Research and development, when it comes to designing these batteries, it takes a very long time. Lithium-ion batteries, they had like 40 years of research behind them, right? Aluminium-ion batteries, the research is still in its infancy. So if we focus on a few applications and then maybe spend another 2 or 3 years on designing batteries for hybrid cars, another 2 or 3 years for designing batteries for stationary storage, so I cannot focus on a very large market at the moment, but I'm going to focus on something that is attainable in a few years. So I think it's important that we just make sure that our investors and the consumers are aware, and we are truthful to them, that we are not thinking of replacing lithium-ion at the moment. But maybe, if you need a safer or a cheaper energy source, then you have this alternative available. So I think if you cater to smaller markets, for someone like me who's just starting up a company, I think that would work for me.
Yeah, the great thing about Tasman Iron is that you've identified the niche.
Yeah.
And you've been, from our conversation and what I've seen of your company's information, you've really, really understood the problems that people have with existing batteries, and you've really zoomed into that. You've got some solid research and development, and you're developing the intellectual property as well.
So we filed the patent last year, and from that we are trying to commercialize this technology and whatnot. it's just that we spoke to a few consumers who use electric bikes, and it was that they want bicycles, electric bikes that are lighter in weight, at the same time safer. So most of the companies that use lithium-ion batteries in their products, they have to pay a very huge price when it comes to, making those cargoes safe. So, entertaining those investors, and telling them about that safety prospect of aluminium ion might just work for us at the moment. And then we can think about competing with Tesla, not at the moment.
Love your ambition. That's
Yep.
great. That's awesome. Sean, let's go to the other end of town. Yeah. So Tasman Iron is just being created. Lanzatec founded 2005. What's your view on how big New Zealand CleanTech could be? And I use the sort of size, and you can interpret it how you feel fit.
I mean, I think the bottom line is that CleanTech must be transformative. It must entirely disrupt the energy, fuel, and manufacturing systems that we have today. It must disrupt farming. It must disrupt every aspect of society in order that we can transition to a sustainable future. And therefore, it can be as big as it needs to be. I think that it is a dominating and driving force for all industry going forward. There isn't, if you talk to a shoe manufacturer today, they have a sustainability policy. If you talk to a beauty care product manufacturer today, they have a sustainability policy. And this is true, if you talk a steel manufacturer, they have a sustainability policy. All of these companies, all of these groups, all of these manufacturers, they all need CleanTech. And for many, there is a real challenge in identifying ways that they can move from their current manufacturing facilities, their current manufacturing practices, the materials they use to new materials. And I don't think there's a sector that's left untouched by this. And so I think for Callaghan, it's a completely, a gravitationally logical move to focus on CleanTech, because I think it is the mega trend above all other mega trends that will drive innovation over the coming 2, 3, 4 decades.
Yeah.
So how big will it get? It will dominate everything.
Great answer, Sean. And I love the way that you're starting to talk about the potential of New Zealand cleantech innovation to fundamentally disrupt the economic system that we currently have. Sometimes when we talk,
I don't think there's a choice.
Yeah.
I don't think there is no choice. The climate crisis has now been recognized so broadly, so unanimously, and so fundamentally, not just by governments, but by individual companies across every single part of industry, such that now real goals are being committed to and real strides are being made in order to transform manufacturing systems, in order to transform energy systems, and deliver to a consumer base that genuinely demands sustainability.
Thanks,
This
Sean.
is no longer about bio. This is about sustainability.
Yeah, that's great, Sean. Thank you so much for that. And good segue to a question from the audience. So Peter Griffin is asking a really interesting question about negative emission technology. So this is an interesting term. I think it reflects just how quickly we're moving from reducing greenhouse gas emissions to actually coming up with products which are negative, i.e. they are not just reducing, but they are removing one way or another. The way he's phrased it is this: what work is underway in New Zealand in negative emissions technology? He's given some examples here: carbon capture and storage, direct capture, carbon scrubbing, etc. I think we could get into semantics there, what's negative and what's reducing emissions. He's also pointed out that these technologies will need to play a role if we are to meet our Paris Climate Agreement targets. It's a fascinating question because there's some really straightforward ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere without any technology. Essentially planting indigenous trees and plants which have a very long life. You know, that's a really straightforward way to do it, but there is a role for technology as well. So the question is, what work is there in negative emissions technology in New Zealand? I mean, I'm quite happy to answer that one. We've heard from a couple of people already, but carbon capture and storage is a really, really fascinating one, which has been on the research and development stage for a number of years. A number of pilot plants have been deployed as well, but it still seems to lack that kind of real, just making good business sense. For some of the reasons which are relatively obvious, there's a kind of parasitic load. So if you put on a carbon capture and storage plant onto a power station, you actually need some energy to drive that carbon capture and storage plant, which in turn reduces arguably the overall efficiency of a power plant as well. Now, and this is generally the way it goes. If you're trying to kind of suck carbon emissions from the atmosphere or from flue gases, there's usually this additional energy requirement. So we need to be kind of careful about it. Having said that, there are always going to be these niche applications where these things make sense. To come to the core of your question, though, Peter, I would answer that there is little work being done in those different types of technologies. When we think about climate technology, they usually go into kind of different areas. There's the alternative fuels, such as kind of what Lanzatec is talking about. Then there's novel energy storage, which is what Shalini's talking about at Tasman. And then there are some other areas like renewable energy, either creating new types of renewable energy or the integration of them into the system. So thanks for your question, Peter. From Anonymous, next question. Here's a good one. This is quite fascinating. So the construction sector. It accounts for 20% of New Zealand's carbon footprint. Okay, yeah, I think we can think about that percentage, but let's just say that the construction sector accounts for a good proportion of New Zealand's carbon emissions. How can construction businesses derive value from construction waste and create a more circular economy? Who's feeling strong on that one? Bit of hesitation?
Well, I mean, I think all of these businesses, I mean, think about what's the economic driver behind the decisions that people make. The economic driver is to get something that's fit for purpose and the least cost. And so today we don't actually charge for the climate impact of a particular material or a particular fuel or a particular process. And so one of the things that we need to start considering, as we have, for example, with cigarettes, where we tax according to the impact of a cigarette on a person and on society, we need to now start thinking about taxing in the context of CO2 on a society or on the world. And I think when you think like that, you start to create a situation where different business decisions are being made and different commercial decisions are being made. And in that context, using sustainable materials in building, for example, using different sources of plastic in building, these become no-brainers, these become very obvious, and these become cost competitive.
I've got a thought on that.
Yeah, go for it.
It doesn't, the cost to the construction industry to demolish something and send it to landfill it makes more sense for them to do that than it does to have the house or the thing that they're demolishing pulled apart and reused. And that is a price point issue, and that can be fixed very easily. So you can change the incentive of the construction industry quite simply by changing the amount that you charge them for their waste. And I've seen a piece of architectural technology called X-Frame recently in an investment committee that I chair called Momentum, and they had to go to Australia because the incentive wasn't here to use their repurposable modular framing that would allow buildings to be taken apart. And it's this lack of long-term thinking. It's this it's cheaper to do this, even though it's extremely wasteful.
So what did Australia have that New Zealand didn't?
better quality plywood, and a construction industry who were more interested.
Right. Okay. Veronica, can we just broaden that question out? Because we're kind of getting into a space where if we're, say, thinking about construction and demolition waste from the construction sector, you know, the government is considering increasing the landfill costs, so that should start to change the economics. With Humblebee, do you see, what sort of market signals do you see which will encourage your customers to kind of move from what they're currently doing to what Humblebee is developing?
The market signals from government and consumer, and I think from the consumer perspective, people are going, they're hearing more and more about the depth of pollution. So you see plastic waste in the bellies of microbes in the deepest parts of the ocean, and that level of pollution is really quite terrifying. Like, we have quite literally polluted the entire marine food chain with plastic, and that feels quite personal because people eat seafood. And then from a government perspective, I think governments are, well, I know that they're changing regulations so that harmful chemistries to their consumers are being phased out and regulated out. And they're also going, we don't want to be the ones left holding all of this landfill. We don't want to be the ones storing the world's plastic and having it shipped to us. So we're going to change our regulations so that we're not the manufacturers literally left holding the kind of plastic baby at the end of the day. So it's driving pressure throughout the entire supply chain, both from the consumer and the regulatory end.
Yeah. So that, I mean, it's really encouraging to hear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that manufacturers and consumers are basically, they sound like they're kind of on the same page. They really want to address this problem, and where there are viable solutions, even if they might be a couple of years from full-scale commercialization, that they're getting more and more interested in those. And it seems to be kind of common across the different areas of clean tech, climate crisis, water, resource use, and then they seem to all intertwine as well.
They do. I feel like regenerative is the word that comes to me, because smart resource use isn't just entirely extractive and unsustainable. Clean water is like that's regenerative. We have a lot of, particularly in New Zealand, we have a lot of work to do with regard to cleaning up our water. And climate tech, if you're being regenerative I think in terms of biodiversity, if we're being regenerative in that sense, you touched on it before, then that has an impact on our ability to reach our climate targets.
Nice one. Thanks, Veronica.
That's okay.
Let's take another question. I think there was a good one there from Alan. Where is it? I think it might be the next. Oh, there it is. Right. Ashton, I'm thinking about yourself for this one. It's a tricky one. Would implementing overseas solutions in New Zealand help lift our CleanTech index as well? I might answer that one, but the next one, why reinvent the wheel if a great solution already exists? Perhaps I'll ask you. Implementing overseas solutions in NZ will definitely lift the CleanTech index, but the CleanTech index is also is wonderful actually, because it actually covers the full gamut of CleanTech. So it's got proven technologies and unproven technologies. Callaghan Innovation is mainly talking about unproven technologies, and the CleanTech index is slightly weighted towards the creation of new technologies. Ashton.
So an interesting question, why reinvent the wheel? Now, the business case for roofing tiles, this is our biggest one that we've been working on for the last sort of 10 or 15 years. And just as Sean was saying, we started with the number 8 wire approach, where my first fume hood was a cardboard box with an Bel Air extractor poking out of it, because I was dealing with some smelly chemicals. So, you know, we've been working on this for a decade, but the vision is the same. You know, every square metre of our roof has 1,000 watts being pumped of sunlight pumped on it. And you work out the average area of your average New Zealand roof is 250 square metres. Do the maths, and you can see if you get 650,000 roofs, and you could actually absorb that total energy, you could generate all the energy for the New Zealand economy. You could do it. But the question is, why has nobody done it? And you've got huge companies that have various solutions out there. Dow Powerhouse, you've got Mr. Tesla. You know, there's a whole lot of solutions there, but none of them meet that need. We, for example, put out a little product within Dallas the other day, or in February before the COVID struck, and it actually it converts 40% into energy. So you've got 10% electrical, 30% heat, and it will do it. It will generate the total power requirements for the house, and it can be done. And so I teach a little course at Auckland University on building integrated photovoltaics. I get my students to go away, look at the MED figures, how much energy does the whole of New Zealand industry need? And yes, if you actually convert 650,000 roofs to capture sunlight, yes, you can actually generate the total power requirements. So, you know, your question, how big is our market? Well, how big is the energy market in New Zealand? Mm-hmm. And let's get rid of our reliance on fossil fuels. I'd suggest we convert them all into plastics myself, but anyway, but don't burn them, please. What a waste. You say, are we reinventing the wheel? No, we're doing it better in New Zealand. Yeah. I'm sorry. We're just doing it better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because when you look at and it's a question that we ask ourselves a lot as well, is like, there appear to be solar panels out there already, but not everybody's got them. There are solar panels out there, but they still struggle to get market traction. So the role of research and development and innovation in creating a better solar panel is still very, very relevant. And there are New Zealand technologies such as MSL and others who are really cracking into it. And from the outside, it appears to be, it's a bit like Tasman Iron, thinking about batteries. Why on earth would a New Zealand company take on Elon Musk at his own game? And the reason is because we're pretty nimble, we've got some great ideas, and we actually can get commercial traction, as MSL shows, Avatana shows, and Humblebee and Tasman Iron are on the right track as well. So there really isn't any point replicating existing technologies out there. And what we say to innovators is really understand the space that you're in, really understand your competition, not the ones that are just in market, but the trends that are going to lead to new inventions, and try and go deeper, go more quirky, and go more niche as well. Veronica.
Just very quickly on that, there's an initiative called the Drawdown Project, which validated the best technologies for drawing down greenhouse gases, and if they were to be, and they're proven, and if they were to be scaled. And so I think that New Zealand, if we've got a problem, say for example with wastewater or sewage, let's instead of going, all right, we're going to start from scratch, maybe let's look and see what else has been piloted and we could prove out at scale in New Zealand by leveraging it here. So I think there's an opportunity, to Anton's point and to Shalini's point, to develop novel stuff here, but I think that we shouldn't just feel like we have to do everything from scratch.
Yeah, and that is really central to Callaghan's thinking as well. There's no point. Reinventing the wheel is a great way of saying it. But spotting those niches, and the other advantage of looking at existing technologies is we begin to understand the gaps as well and the potential for improvement. Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, let's move on to some panelist discussions. Some further questions, which I've cooked up myself rather than other people's. All right, let's go for this one. Let's go around each of the businesses that we have in the room and ask, what is your number one challenge for your particular business? I'm thinking we'll start with Tasman Iron here. What is the number one challenge for Tasman Iron succeeding on the global stage?
As you know, that I just finished my PhD, right? And I was a science student for the past 10 or 12 years, and now here I am trying to commercialize this technology. Right now, I wish that if I was exposed to the knowledge that exists here, you know, simple things like, what does a term sheet mean? What is, the shareholders agreement? How do the IP policies actually play in the new company that we're trying to commercialize? Simple things like that. I mean, I decided that I'm going to go with Tasman Iron. I'm going to commercialize it, and I'm going to be there, you know, in the long run. if only, fair IP policies existed, if only uniform IP policies existed all over the New Zealand universities. Victoria University has its own IP policy, and Auckland University has its own. So when I go to these investors, potential investors, all of them are looking for founder-friendly, IP policy. But then we have to work, like as Tasman, I have to work very hard in convincing them that, it is kind of founder-friendly, but not at the moment.
Okay.
So I feel that if Tasman Iron has to succeed, I mean, we are just starting up, right? And right now we need to raise more capital. We need to talk to investors from all over the world. And the thing that I've learned so far is that as long as the company is, incentivizing the inventors, you're going to get more investments. Mm-hmm. And I feel that after talking to the TTOs from all over New Zealand.
Just let us know what a TTO is.
So the TTO is a tech transfer office, and that exists in most of the universities here in New Zealand. Auckland University has one, my university has one, and they help us commercialize this technology. So I have the science in my lab, and to commercialize it, to bring it outside the lab, the TTOs help us they help us a lot. So what I did with Tasman Iron was that Wellington Uni Ventures, they helped us get the KiwiNet Tier 1 and Tier 2 fundings. Mm-hmm. And then we filed a patent, and right now we're trying to raise, the pre-seed or the angel investments. But then again, the problem is that the IP policy is not very transparent, and that is something that I have a hard time, convincing the future investors.
Okay.
So I feel that if Tasman Iron has to succeed, then we in New Zealand have to make sure that the inventors or, new people like us who are trying to commercialize something, they are aware of these terminologies, and they're aware of the loopholes that exist in the commercialization world.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Shalini. So what you're talking about is a lot of the innovation in terms of the kind of underlying research and development is coming from the universities, through people such as yourselves and your colleagues, and then great people like you say, we're going to commercialize this, and you're talking about a whole bunch of barriers, mm-hmm. from going from R&D in the university to the brutal world of raising money and being commercial as well. I'd really like to bring Veronica in here next, because Veronica, I know you helped Shalini out recently with some of these issues. What do you see from your perspective in terms of the number one challenge for Humblebee in terms of getting out and succeeding on that global stage?
We had a similar issue to Shalini, in that we wanted to use a university to help us commercialise. But the terms were so appallingly bad, and luckily for me, my father was a lawyer, so I could tell that they were appallingly bad, and I went outside the university system for that reason, and that meant that I had to pour my own money into the business, which I did. But what that meant was that I wasn't eligible for any of the KiwiNet funding, any of the pre-seed grants, any of that stuff that would have helped me. So I had to take on venture capital funding very, very early. So that was very hard, and the way what that does, it fundamentally makes your company less investable because you've had to take on dilutive capital very early at a low valuation. And there's an issue with the attitude that institutions in New Zealand have towards intellectual property being generated within their walls, and it's one of a land grab versus a legacy play. And institutions in America go, we want companies to be come out of our institutions to be billion-dollar companies. They don't go, we're going to take 80% before a pre-seed stage and before you've even raised any capital. So I think that's a real problem. You literally hamstring companies before they've even gone out and raised capital. I know people who've tried to commercialise out of Auckland University and who went to raise capital in Australia, and investors looked at their cap table and said, we can't invest in this. We have a policy where founders have to be at least 70%, and they were already at 20.
And just to zoom into that particular point, why do investors want founders to have that level of shareholding?
It's really hard being a founder. There's a lot of personal and financial risk. It's grueling. It's difficult and it takes a special person, and they want them to stick at it.
Yep.
So they need to be properly incentivized, and that incentive comes with ownership of the company. And so if you so say I've been working on Humblebee 4 years full time, and if I had only had 10% and the payoff, and I was going to have to raise millions of dollars, and I was going to get diluted down to 2%, why would I stay? Like, what's the incentive?
Okay.
And so what we're doing to our innovators is we're just hamstringing them from the start.
Yep.
And that's a massive barrier to
Awesome.
any development, regardless of clean tech.
Thank you. That was really interesting, just to kind of drill into that and get a sense of kind of what investors are after with these early stage businesses, and also what it takes in terms of special people to found and grow these businesses as well.
If I can add to
Please
that. So honestly, as a scientist, I really want to, send Tasman Iron batteries out in the space, right? They need me to do that. And I want to design better batteries that can store more energy and whatnot. But as long as the founders or inventors like me have been incentivized and, we feel motivated. My PhD supervisor and I, we are the co-founders of Tasman Iron. So as long as they keep us motivated, I think we're going to stick around Tasman Iron, and we're going to make sure that Tasman Iron, reaches space and water. Like, we have these big plans, and we know that it takes a very long time, especially when it comes to batteries. I mean, I think of designing batteries for commercial drones right now, and that's going to take at least 2 years. If I plan on competing with Tesla, that's going to take at least 6 to 7 years. So think about sending those batteries into space. That's going to take 10 to 12 years. And the investors, they want these thinkers or the scientists to stick with the company that can reach whatever heights they wish for. So I think that is the reason why the investors, they want to make sure that the scientists or the inventors are properly incentivized before they invest into that particular company.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thanks for that, Shani. Why don't we turn over to say Sean next, who's stuck with his company for a little while now, and just talk about, I mean, arguably you're on the way to succeeding at a global scale, but I suspect your ambition is still not fulfilled there. So what is the number one challenge for Lanzatec to get to the global scale that it really wants to get to?
I mean, interestingly, all of these conversations come down to money. Yeah? So and for us, it's no different in that for us, the challenge is now shifted from not being quite so much company financing the company as financing projects and growing the number of deployments we can make and accelerating the rate of deployment of commercial facilities. And so looking at new financing strategies, new financing models or financing vehicles for commercial facilities becomes now one of the challenges we face, as well as but actually another challenge we have faced in the past has been legislation, because we have a technology that kind of led the way in terms of sustainable thinking around certain resources, and our technology has shown that you can make sustainable fuels from, for example, a waste emission from a steel mill, or you can make sustainable fuels from municipal solid waste. But there are geographies in the world where the use of municipal solid waste or industrial waste for the production of sustainable fuels is not incentivized in the same way that making sustainable fuels from biomass is incentivized. So you also come across different parts of the world where legislative inhibition is a challenge, and we've worked really hard to overcome that and spent a vast amount of money overcoming that in different places. So now you look at in the EU, for example, the new legislation there incentivizes the use of industrial waste and municipal solid waste for sustainable fuel production. And that's in large part because of the demonstration that we gave of the potential for this resource and the potential for technology such as ours.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Sean, as well. And it kind of takes us on to that point that technologies can sometimes kind of lead the way to enable more supportive regulations overall. We see that to a reasonable extent in water, for example. You know, when you've got a set of water quality standards, and the question is, well, how can we make these water quality standards more stringent? And there are plenty of technologies out there which say you can definitely do better, more frequent, low-cost monitoring, and then visualization and analytics, which give regulators the confidence to say, okay, let's tighten up the regulations on water. Really fascinating about that European regs as well. I'd love to hear more about that. I might look into it separately from today.
I mean, I think the point essentially is that legislators should be legislating for outcomes, and not pathways. And those outcomes then become the focus of innovators and entrepreneurs to fill the capability gap. And so by clever legislation actually incentivizes innovation.
Nice.
Dumb legislation inhibits it.
I think, can I?
Yeah, go for it, Veronica.
To the point of smart legislation or legislation that holds back, and I'm sure, Sean, you'll agree with me that New Zealand's blanket policy on genetically modified organisms is a real hindrance to clean tech in New Zealand. For Humblebee specifically, it'll mean that we have to go offshore much, much sooner. I know that there are people who would want to create new protein sources or use synthetic biology and fermentation to create milk products, and we can't do that here. We're prohibited based on this very, very, very old-fashioned understanding of what genetic modification is and the threats that it poses to biosecurity.
Nice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, essentially today, synthetic biology offers an opportunity to convert vast quantities of sustainable resources, not only into fuels, but also into plastics, fibers, rubbers, polymers of any kind, medicines, proteins, etc. And so we're in a position now to engineer biology in ways and at a precision that was never possible in the past. The opportunities are really just beginning, and New Zealand is really missing out on the opportunity to establish synthetic biology-based industries locally because of its legislation. Right now, I think it's illegal to grow a genetically modified organism in a reactor in a laboratory in New Zealand at a greater than 10-liter volume, which is incompatible with anything commercial.
Good one. Let's go to you, Ashton, about this question about the number one barrier for MSL or any of the other businesses that you're involved in terms of succeeding on that global stage, and then we'll cut to some audience Q&A.
Well, our biggest issue is intellectual property, of course, and retaining our intellectual property.
Right.
You've got to make sure that it's not stolen, if you like. So yes, I am an academic, but I really haven't published a paper on what I really do for the last 10 years because I have chosen to have a commercial focus. To me, I think employing my kids, my PhD students, they're actual adults,
yes, of course.
Out of university is more exciting to me than publishing a paper. But after 10 years, just this year, I've been given the go-ahead to publish 3 publications, which talk about how we can do things, especially catalytic processes, much better. But that's a choice. That's a choice that I've had to make. It inhibits my academic career, but I think for commercial success, we actually have to be silent in New Zealand. Just getting out putting in a patent and then writing a paper, you've let the world know what you're doing. And so we've got the luxury, because we're well funded, we've got the luxury of being able to sit there for 10 years and sit on our thumbs, sit on our fingers, not really, but not be known by the world what we're actually doing. So success is being quiet until you can get it out there.
Yeah.
And I think our sensors, for example, come out this year or in 2021, and I think right then we have to publish. We have a unique catalytic conversion process. It comes out, it has to be published. So great, so that's being silent is the biggest one.
The kind of classic stealth mode
Well, really,
Yeah.
we're Kiwis. You know.
And at the same time, I presume, Ashton, that you're in sort of stealth tech development, but at the same time, you're kind of engaging with those key first customers. You know, you're working on the commercials at the same time. So,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have very strong links into Japan, into some of the largest companies up there. We have very strong links into some of the universities around Boston, very strong links. So we develop those relationships, of course,
Yeah.
and also industries up in Texas. So, you know, we just do it quietly.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're never branded, and our company up in the US, I don't even think it has the word New Zealand in it.
Yeah.
But hey, most of the intellectual property is generated down here. The development's all done down here, but it depends what market you're in.
Yeah. And we were talking just a little bit, Ashton, just around that one out about that sort of creation of the IP in New Zealand and then essentially the manufacturing elsewhere. Do you see any other models which would be powerful for New Zealand?
Well, but to me, you know, I don't really want to manufacture in the US. I'd rather we manufactured in New Zealand and got the actual benefits here in terms of growing high-tech industry here in New Zealand. So, but we don't see that with the roofing tiles because you're dealing with hundreds of tons of raw materials. It doesn't make sense to ship hundreds of tons down to New Zealand and then ship it back out again as product. No. So therefore, roofing tiles, yes, we have to do that. We do manufacturing of amorphous silicon solar cells in Japan. Why? Because, well, probably health and safety reasons. You can't set up such a plant down here in New Zealand. But that aside, the ones like sensors and diagnostics, no, you're talking about billion-dollar markets there. We can do that in New Zealand, and we can fly boxes of sensors around the world, and we will be doing that in New Zealand. Catalytic converters, no, we have some unique intellectual property there, and I do believe we can make the key electrodes for catalytic conversion and also your batteries for your electrodes for your batteries as well. And I'd have to have a yak about you with you after this. So I just sort of think there are key bits of intellectual property that we can manufacture here, and that's what we must do in order to really get a benefit back to New Zealand.
Yeah. So that's great, Ashton. I mean, we're kind of talking about some different models about how New Zealand can succeed in clean tech from an economic perspective, because we're about creating valuable high-tech jobs here as well. And what I was hearing you say was that there's a couple of different models there, including that not only the IP, intellectual property around key components, but also the manufacture of those high-tech products as well, which is very, very exciting. And perhaps they would then be exported to another market where the rest of the system would be put together.
Yeah, definitely. But also incentivizing and encouraging our kids to go through and doing the types of degrees required to support it. You know, I gave a talk at one of the big Tainui huis down in the Waikato, and I was just encouraging the young people to do engineering and science. You know, why are we not? You know, there's so much passion there, and you need passion. You've got to believe your own BS, I'm sorry. You have to believe it, and you've got to be driven. And we've actually got a CEO who is completely driven, and he's like the Energizer Bunny, but you actually need that. You need that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Ashton. Let's go to some questions. I really like this one from Kat, which is really talking about open sourcing and collaboration. So her question is, how can we approach this, which I presume is NZ CleanTech, in a more open source and collaborative way for successful impact, rather than the common competitiveness we see between New Zealand companies and institutes? Now, the reason that I find this very interesting is that saying collaboration and actually doing it in a genuine way is very, very difficult for businesses, even if they're non-compete. So it's a great question. The way that, you know, from a Callaghan innovation perspective, we see it is that the first thing to get, well, not necessarily the first thing, but one way of getting the right sort of collaboration is for the whole of government to collaborate in a sensible way. The next part of that is not just the whole of New Zealand government, but also the institutes around it as well. And by that, I'm talking universities, places like Food Bowl, Level 2, which provide the R&D facilities as well. But then the really thorny part is, how do businesses collaborate for their own greater commercial success and to have this important environmental impact on the world. Now, I don't know which person would like to go front.
Speak to that.
Please do.
I would like to see, one of the reasons that Humblebee has been able to collaborate internationally and institutionally, interdisciplinary, is because we were outside an academic institution, and so we weren't kind of constrained by just working within that academic institution. That has allowed us to draw on expertise that wasn't necessarily in one institution. So that agility came with the freedom of being able to commercialise outside. The other thing is, I personally think it's a bit of a travesty that the public does not have access to academic publications that are publicly funded, that they're locked behind a paywall. I think that's wrong, and I'd love to see that change. And I do think that there is a cultural shift around businesses of similar kind in New Zealand starting to work together to take on much bigger companies globally. And I'd love to see more of that supported. Yeah.
So that's interesting. You're talking about, can you just explain that one a little bit so I don't paraphrase you incorrectly? What I did hear was that companies with a similar objective or similar technologies working together.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit more about it.
So for an example that I can think of off the top of my head, and I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this, is that the Chia sisters in Nelson want to give New Zealanders really good quality, and they are amazing quality beverages, but to get distribution at a high level around New Zealand, you have to compete with Coca-Cola and all of the infrastructure associated with them. So they banded together with other beverage makers in New Zealand and bought the infrastructure together.
Right.
So they are competing for the purchase, so someone coming in and buying a drink, but they are working collaboratively to disrupt the stronghold of Coca-Cola within every dairy and every
Brilliant.
restaurant, and
Yeah.
That's an example.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Totally,
So you've got a
yeah.
network of small businesses, a common competitor, and they come together around it. Sean, I can see you pretty engaged about this collaboration question as well.
I mean, so we've collaborated with a number of different companies that have very complementary technology, and I think we're all looking to develop our particular technology in a way to address certain market needs, but our individual technologies fit in a framework, fit in a larger context. For us, we've collaborated, for example, with companies that have CO2 electrolyzers, so they can take CO2 and they can reduce it down with sustainable power to a molecule that then we can convert into fuels and chemicals, so that now you can make fuels and chemicals from sustainable electrons and CO2. We've collaborated with groups that have different organisms that you can put in reactor systems that we've scaled in order to expand the number of sustainable products that can be made through the kinds of fermentation strategies that we've developed. And everybody benefits from this because we show a greatly expanded opportunity for our technology, and they do too. And so I think it's essential that there is collaboration, but it generally works in contexts where you're either both going to benefit from a single outcome, and you're not competing necessarily technically. So I think that's you don't have to overlap technically, but see some synergistic growth in opportunity through that collaboration.
Yeah, and I actually think companies work together very well. When, like Sean was saying, when we're not actually competing for the same market, but we can see some synergies there. I don't think that's really an issue at all.
Okay. Is that not an issue within New Zealand or kind of internationally, or are there some other kind of patterns you've kind of come across?
Well, no, I think if people can see benefit out of what we do, and we're only a small player globally, if we can add value to somebody else's product, sure, why not? Why don't we work together?
The hard part is finding those synergies. It's like it's finding the company that your tech could be used in that would benefit them and you. It's that creative. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of putting links together that you they're not necessarily business as usual. And that's the really hard thing. And maybe that's something Callaghan Innovation could help with.
You're almost leading to one of our final questions.
Oh,
there.
good.
Brilliantly placed. Okay, now there's been a few questions come up. I can see Sean Malloy of Avatana and others have been asking a kind of similar thread of questions. Are there enough garages/basements available for all New Zealand innovators, which is a great question. And then this question about what resources will Callaghan Innovation or government in general commit to this goal and getting us into the top 10. I can speak from experience about the first question about are there enough garages and basements. We're working with a really interesting business at the moment, and they struggle to find like a 40-meter test facility. It took them a long time. The cost, the availability, the health and safety concerns just kind of went on and on. They cracked it in the end during COVID as well, which was awesome to see. So I think there probably are enough R&D facilities out there, but difficult to get hold of them for many people.
Difficult to get hold of them, and then also difficult to retain ownership of your intellectual property if you're hiring them to do it, or if you're I mean, this whole garages and Freds and Sheds attitude that we have, if you're not able to access funding from those garages and sheds, you have to go to university to do it and pay for the pleasure of being able to access government funding, and then that hamstrings your company. Like, what pathways are we offering our creatives sitting and tinkering in sheds, if it's just that one track that has
this is really why an organisation or a facility like Level 2 is so important. I mean, I really think, if I look at the history of Lanzatec, we wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that facility and the freedom it afforded us to experiment with toxic flammable gases in a biological fermentation process. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Lanzatec came out of the facility that is now Level 2, and so did Rocket Lab. And so these are two organisations that have entirely different technologies, entirely different requirements. But we both came out of the same facility, and we've both to date been tremendously successful as a result of that founding. And it used to really amuse me that you'd have all these incubators that had all this structure around them with people who are fascinated to advise you on your business, having never run a business of their own. Whereas in Level 2, we had none of that. In fact, what we were encouraged to do is become independent, be independent, have independent businesses that grew with their own unique culture to reflect the unique technologies that those businesses were seeking to develop. And guess what? It was successful. Awesome. And I think, my sincere hope is that Level 2 will carry on that tradition of fostering Kiwi innovation in a way that allows it to be independent, free-spirited, and truly innovative, and not trying to fit into some preordained kind of innovation mold that is somewhat outdated and poorly informed.
Okay, thank you all. I can see Shalini, you want to go for it? We've got not too much time, but
just talking about Level 2. Every time I've spoken with people from Level 2, they've always offered us the lab space for making Tasman ion batteries. Just wanted to say that out loud, because we are in the R&D stage, and someone just saying that we have these facilities here where you can test your batteries and whatnot, that meant a lot.
That is awesome to hear.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of getting a broad sense that facilities like Level 2 are really helpful if we want to do research and development led clean technology.
CleanTech is not like SaaS. You can't just go in a garage and spend a week writing some code, or a weekend writing some code and shipping out an MVP. Like, that is just not how deep tech, clean tech works. And one of the things that international investors asked me was, why are you taking private funding so early? And it's because even grants like Callaghan require there to be a private equity match, and that is not the case in other countries. There are grants where you can get kind of $50,000, $100,000, $300,000 to progress your technology to a point that it is investable. Because what we're doing by, we're limiting the number of deep tech companies that will be started in New Zealand by having policies like that. But also you're asking your angel and your venture capital base in New Zealand to take a higher risk in their portfolio, which they will have limited appetite for. So again,
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Veronica.
Pleasure.
And can I just thank everybody who's been watching for your questions. It's been really, really good. And I'd particularly like to say thank you to Sean Simpson, Veronica, Ashton, and Shalini for your commentary as well. We were talking about this before we went on air. And your views today are really going to help us shape up this NZ CleanTech for the World 2-year plan, which we're working with Callaghan Innovation and other organisations to really pull together. So your inputs today have been much appreciated. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as our namesake Sir Paul Callaghan said, 100 inspired New Zealand entrepreneurs can turn this country around. We've had many more than 100 talented Kiwis join this event today. So New Zealand's in great hands if that's anything to go by. So we know COVID has thrown a spanner in the works of many businesses, both in New Zealand and globally. And it's humbling and inspiring to have innovators like the 4 of you and many online today. So this is in line of the thinking of Sir Paul Callaghan. He encouraged us to be proud to back inspiring and forward-thinking clean tech innovators. So we're driven by Sir Paul's vision to make New Zealand a place where talent truly wants to live. So to remind everybody, Callaghan Innovation's purpose is to activate innovation, help businesses grow faster for a better NZ by connecting people, opportunities and networks, providing tailored technical solutions, skills and capability development programs, as well as Veronica mentioned, research and development funding. We look forward to supporting all clean tech innovators out there on your journey. Feel free to get in touch with us. Again, thank you to our panelists, and a reminder that you can get a recording of this presentation. Certainly we'll be pouring through it as well and picking out the nuggets. So keep an eye on your inbox for this, and we'll be sending a survey your way. Don't be shy on that. Just let us know what you thought and provide any other suggestions as well. Okay, and in closing, finally, a reminder to visit the Callaghan Innovation website. Download the free Waste to Value report. Don't hesitate to contact us for more information and support. Enjoy the rest of your day. Kia pai, tō rā.